Madagascar is an island in the Indian Ocean off the eastern coast of southern Africa. It is the fourth largest island in the world, and its area is slightly larger than France, its former colonising power. Meter gauge lines were, until recently, government-owned, but the northern group of lines are now operated by Madarail, with a majority Belgian holding. We start our visit in the capital, Antananarivo, with views of the busy Avenue de l'Indépendance and the fine railway station. There is a very infrequent train service to the capital, and the ground floor of the station has been converted to a very upmarket shopping mall. Outside the station we find a very informal and busy street market. On the track side of the station we see the Art Nouveau design signalling centre and then visit the train control centre. Train paths are plotted on traditional graphs, and communication with the train crew is via 3 different mobile phone networks and also a GPS location system. A visit was made to the engine shed and works. Here is one of 5 Chinese-built Bobo diesel electrics, built in 2007. This is a small Whitcomb tractor unit built in 1947 and now out of use. This is number 1805 awaiting tyre reprofiling. And this is a 1989 Alstom-built Bobo of 1,600 horsepower, withdrawn, and BB404, the former Tamatave shunter, alongside the second Alstom loco number 255, still in the old CFM livery. Here is a first look at a Michelin railcar, ZM515, out of use. The workshop appeared well equipped, but being a Saturday was not in use. Here is the foundry, where once a month brake blocks are produced. There was a very unusual 4-track traverser. It didn't appear to have been in recent use. This is a route diagram of the Madarail system. From Antananarivo, 2 lines radiate out. The main line of 372 kilometres runs down a very steep escarpment to the coast, ending at the port town of Tamatave. The second line, much less heavily used, heads south to Andersebe. There is also a long branch line heading north to a large chrome mine and the town of Ambatrasoratra. On Sunday the 9th of September we began our 14-hour journey from the capital down to the coast at Tamasina. This is shown in red on the map. Our locomotive for much of the time on Madarail was an ex-Portuguese Alstom Bobo of 1,050 horsepower, number 1202. Here it arrives at Tana station, ready to couple onto our train. We were soon underway, and almost immediately we were served coffee by the very attentive Madarail staff. As the line was single track, we had frequent stops to pass trains coming up the grade to Tana. This is Manjaka-Andriana, 48.5 kilometres from Tana. As we descended the escarpment, we saw just how much land is given over to rice cultivation in traditional paddy fields. The railway had been built cheaply, and river crossings such as this were rare. This is the important junction station of Moramanga. It's a crew changing point and has some track maintenance facilities. Our locomotive was given a quick check here. Moramanga town was a busy place, with the usual street traders selling mainly bananas. There was some wagon load unloading taking place, but all at a very slow pace. The depot was disused. In steam days it would have been an important locomotive changing point. This is one of two 25-ton capacity diesel-electric cranes. The other is at Andersee Bay. Neither are mobile, but apparently both are used for lifting purposes. Quite why this carriage had been placed here is anybody's guess. There were many old wooden-bodied goods wagons at Moramanga. They all had a small veranda on which passengers could travel. And this is a Malagasy equivalent of a North American caboose. Train and track crew could live in these wagons when working away from home. Moving down the line to Andersebe, 148.3 kilometres from Tana, we see what at first sight appears to be a double-headed freight train heading up the Greater Tana. But loco number 0221, one of the early Alstom locos, coupled behind Chinese number 1803, had suffered front-end damage and was being towed back to works at Tana. Here is our first view of the restored Michelin railcar number 517, named Vico, seen here at Andersebe. From here on to the coast we followed a large river. The railway line twisted and turned as it followed the river, and speed was only about 25 kilometres an hour. There was another freight to cross at Kalika, 193 kilometres from Tana. This was a very laid-back place. A children's funfair played Hawaiian-style music, people were friendly and relaxed, and one even fast asleep. We quickly had the impression that there wasn't much to do at this place, but to sit around, talk and enjoy yourself. Although one person had a little job to do. Back to the trains. An Alstom number 0231 waits the train ticket to take its train of loaded petroleum tanks up to Tana. A little further down the line at Lohariandava, 209 kilometres from Tana, two freights were waiting for the road. Number 1207, newly repaired from Tana Works, has another oil train, and behind it is Chinese number 1801 with a container wagon train. Moving further along, we saw the local way of crossing the fast-flowing river. That night was spent at Tuamasina, also known as Tamatave. Bicycle rickshaws ferried people around. We boarded the train at Tuamasina's main station, Mangiers. It needed some care and attention. We travelled out of Mangiers station to Manangareza, where the locomotive ran round ready to head down to the docks. spent about 3 hours exploring several sections of Tamatavi's port network of railway sidings, including the container terminal. We had some clearance problems, but these were quickly overcome. Occasionally we came across groups of women engaged in what seemed like pointless weeding work. Number 0228 brings a train of empty vans out of the port. We now visit the new servicing depot, built in connection with the large nickel smelting works located on a huge site along the coast. 5 centre cab locos owned by Dynatech, the smelting company, but in Madagascar livery, arrived in 2011. They carry numbers BB 1001 to BB 1005 and all carry names. While we looked around the depot, our train was shunted across to the depot where the carriage had its water tanks topped up. The port area was busy with rail traffic, and here BB 1205 trundles through with some wagons. These are the new hopper wagons for moving limestone and sulphur into the smelter. It's interesting that these brand new wagons have an old wooden-bodied brake van attached. This is Madagascar station. All the stations in the port area were very well maintained. On leaving Madagascar, we travelled about 2 hours back along the coast to Androcoditra, where we left the train and caught a small boat along the Panagaranes Canal to spend the night in beach huts. We passed the nickel smelter with its huge piles of refined sulphur and eventually arrived at Androcoditra. The local population were extremely interested in our arrival. The next morning we continued our journey part way along the main line to Andersee Bay, the station for a well-known national park. While awaiting our train to arrive, a long freight bound for the port passed slowly by in charge of BB 0229.
What the hell are this lot?
Here we are approaching the important intermediate station of Brickaville. We had a run past over a river bridge and the train stopped in Brickaville station to collect its next train orders. Journeying further inland, we followed the very scenic river Vogeyala. In places the river was undercutting the land on which the railway was built, and here we see a works crew repairing a landslide. Most of the rainforest had been removed, but occasionally we saw a small remnant which for some reason had been left behind. Another station stop, this time at Lohariandava, where we dropped off a crew member. Here is an obviously wealthy family, dressed in some spectacular clothes. We see, first in the distance and then close up, the colourful tulip tree. We saw many scenes like this of very poor dwellings alongside the railway line. Slash and burn still takes place on steep slopes where massive soil erosion occurs. Andersebe had been the very laid-back place on our outward journey earlier. There were fewer people around today, and far more bananas waiting transshipment. This was the only section of double track we saw anywhere on the line. This was near the station of Fanovana, 167 kilometers from Tana. BB 1802 waits for us to leave the single track. The powerful Chinese locos work almost entirely on the steeper sections of line. We arrived at Andersee Bay with its large station, formerly a hotel, but now disused. After a night spent in Andersee Bay, part of the group travelled up the long branch line to Ambotandrazaka and the short branch to the Murano Chrome loading sidings. It was a very misty start from Andersee Bay as our train pulled into the platform. These are the coaches to form the thrice-weekly train from Moramanga Junction to Ambotandrazaka. However, we were using the locomotive that should have pulled the service train, so it was cancelled. Here, BB 1204 has brought a container train into Moramanga Junction. It uncouples and sets off to add an empty oil tanker to the rear of the train. The branch line runs across a high plateau, and the landscape looked very dry at the end of the dry season. The red storage van at the end of the train is a former Swiss Firka Oberab carriage, built in 1980 and brought to Madagascar in 2005. End of the branch line at Ambotondrazaka. We are arriving here at Vogeyala, where the Marano Chrome line branches off. There was an assortment of rolling stock here. Our carriages were shunted into a siding as they couldn't travel over the Chrome branch. Instead, the track bashers crowded into the cab of the loco. Again, the local population just couldn't understand what was happening. Here we see our locomotive with its cab full of track bashers, slowly making its way along the Chrome branch. While waiting for the locomotive to arrive, we saw several interesting forms of transport on the local road. After about a 3-hour journey, the locomotive finally arrived at the Marano Chrome station and then at the loading sidings. There was another train already in the sidings, its wagons being in the process of loading, and the locomotive was BB0231. Chrome ore was being unloaded by hand from a tipper lorry that wouldn't tip. Some wagons had uncrushed chrome ore, while others had ore which had been ground into a coarse powder. The long journey back to the junction station to collect our carriages began. Children of the junction station of Vogeyala enjoyed watching one of our group give a demonstration of bubble blowing. Then it was slowly back along the branch line to Moramanga Junction, a journey of 122 kilometres. The land was severely eroded, not just topsoil, but the rock too. Back at Moramanga Junction we watched as BB1801 pulled a 500-ton train of loaded oil tankers into the sidings. The next day we made the journey from Andersee Bay back to Antananarivo. Before our train could start from Andersee Bay, we had to wait for Chinese-built BB1803 to pass through with 4 empty oil tankers heading down the grade. Climbing up the escarpment we saw yet more areas of paddy fields, and then travelled over the spiral section of track. Then came disaster. We could proceed no further than Mandraka station, as a derailment had occurred to a descending freight train in the section ahead. We left the train and had a slow journey back to Tana by bus. Our next journey was from Antananarivo to Andersebe. We had a change of locomotive for this journey to BB1203. Half the group could travel on this train and half in the Michelin railcar. Michelin railcar number ZM517 Vico, which is the name of a bird meaning go faster, leaves Antananarivo station. Half the group who couldn't travel on the railcar was scheduled to change over at the midway point of Ambatalampi. And here's the railcar arriving at Ambatalampi. Inside the railcar were 19 wicker chair seats, which, combined with the Michelin tyres, gave a very comfortable ride. Here we pass a typical station, Elempona. All stations had a large disused goods shed in the station building. Although no passenger trains stopped here, there were food sellers hopefully waiting for our train. We didn't stop. There was a freight train ahead of us, so we had occasional stops to let it clear the section ahead, such as here at Sambena. We see the typical disused goods shed. The Madarail crew were cheerful as ever, and here the very simple driver's compartment and controls. At Andersebe, journey's end, the crew assembled for a photograph. And here is the freight train that had preceded us to Andersebe. The station was clean and in good repair, and looked out onto another street called Avenue de l'Independence. The station building was ornate. There were many rickshaws touting for business, and one wedding couple had arrived for photographs in a rickshaw. Our journey on the Fianarantsoa Court Est line was cancelled as there was no working locomotive. We did travel over the section of the line shown in red, and a number of people travelled on a works vehicle over the entire length of the line. The station at Fianarantsoa was a substantial building and was in good condition. When locomotives are available, there are 3 trains a week. We travelled for 23 kilometres as far as Sahanbari in an unrestored Michelin railcar ZM516 named Panbrasa. The station yard at Fianna had a completely disused air about it. The windscreen of the railcar had seen better days. At Sahanbari, the railcar was turned on a triangle. This is the view from the rear window. Again, this line once had large rail-served goods sheds. Sahanbari station was well cared for. It's ironic that the line with the heaviest passenger traffic was out of use due to no working locomotives. Now we come to the real adventure, when 18 of the party set off for Manakara, travelling on the vehicle known as Andersebe and YC-051. As it disappeared into the distance, we wondered if we'd see them ever again. Our final rail journey in Madagascar was from Andersebe back to Tana, a journey of 153.7 kilometres. Half the group travelled in the restored Michelin railcar. The remainder of the group went in the Translimo coach. Here the red storage car is being remarshalled at the end of the train. The Michelin railcar sets off for Tana, while local BB1203 waits with the Translimo train, which will follow. The souvenir sellers were left waiting to attack the remainder of our group. Not far into the journey, a white van collided with the locomotive of the Translimo Express. The van was wrecked, but the driver was unhurt. The locomotive suffered some superficial damage, but could continue with the journey. In contrast to the prosperous agricultural areas, the outskirts of Tana had the very poorest dwellings. In 2004 and 2005, a number of Swiss private railways donated electric passenger cars for use in a proposed urban network in Tana. Nothing has come of this yet. Arrival at deserted Tana station. And a final look at the Translimo Express and our locomotive BB1203.